When three entitled alien nobles decide to handle the annoying human cadet at the prestigious Galactic Military Summit, they quickly learn why humans are classified as Deathworlders. What starts as diplomatic harassment turns into a masterclass in human combat efficiency, delivered with trademark human sarcasm and a complete lack of respect for galactic social hierarchy. The story follows the incident from the aliens' perspective as they witness their carefully ordered universe get turned upside down by one very unimpressed human female. Station Nexus Prime hung in the void like a monument to galactic cooperation, its crystalline spires gleaming with the collected pride of 47 civilized species. Well, 46 civilized species and them, the humans. Commander Zephys of the Altarian Defense Corps adjusted his ceremonial sash, the golden threads catching the ambient lighting of the Grand Assembly Hall. His pale blue skin shimmered with barely contained disdain as he observed the gathering. 2 centuries of diplomatic tradition had built this summit into the pinnacle of military excellence. Representatives from across known space had gathered to discuss strategy, share tactical innovations, and maintain the delicate balance that kept the galaxy from tearing itself apart. And then there was her. Cadet Maya Chen sat alone at table 47. Her plain grey uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate dress uniform surrounding her. No decorative plumes, no ceremonial weapons, no family crests spanning millennia of noble heritage. Just utility pouches and what appeared to be actual combat boots. How wonderfully primitive. "Look at that," Sub-Admiral Corvin whispered, his Centauri throat sacs inflating slightly with amusement. The green-scaled dignitary leaned closer to Zephys, his voice carrying the particular tone reserved for discussing exotic animals at a zoo. "She is eating with her hands again." Zephys followed his gaze to where the human cadet was methodically working through what appeared to be some sort of portable ration. No utensils, no ceremony, just efficient fuel consumption, like watching a predator. Captain Nexel, resplendent in the deep purple of vegan nobility, made a sound that might have been laughter if it had not been so thoroughly disgusted. "My intelligence briefing indicated their species only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 standard decades ago. 3 decades, gentlemen. We have been conducting interstellar diplomacy since before their ancestors discovered agriculture. And yet," Corvin mused, his membrane-covered eyes tracking the humans' movements, "the Galactic Defense Council insisted on including them. Something about expanding perspectives and learning from diverse tactical approaches." Zephys snorted, a sound like air escaping from a punctured habitat seal. "Diverse approaches. Yes, I suppose there is something to be said for studying how primitives conduct warfare. Academic curiosity, you understand. Like observing how insects organize their colonies." The 3 officers represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic military achievement. Zephys commanded the Altarian Third Fleet, responsible for maintaining peace across 17 systems. His family had served in the Defense Corps for 8 generations, each adding to a legacy of tactical brilliance and diplomatic finesse. Corvin oversaw Centauri military intelligence, his network of contacts spanning every civilized world in the Outer Rim. His scales bore the ritual scarification of 40 successful campaigns. Nexil, youngest of the 3 but by no means least accomplished, had personally negotiated the peace treaty that ended the Regale sector conflict. Between them they commanded the respect of half the galaxy and the fear of the other half. And then there was Cadet Chen, sitting alone, eating with her fingers, and apparently reading what looked like a technical manual while she chewed. "Notice how none of the other delegations acknowledge her presence," Nexil observed with satisfaction. "Even the Arcturians, bless their simple hearts, have the good sense to maintain proper social boundaries. She sits alone because she belongs alone." "The humans sent a single representative," Corvin added, consulting his data pad. "Maya Chen, age 24 standard years, graduated from something called the United Earth Military Academy, approximately 1 local year ago. No noble lineage, no distinguished family connections, no significant military achievements. They sent us a child." "A child from a death world," Zephys corrected, and the 3 shared what passed for knowing looks among their respective species. "Oh yes, gentlemen, let us not forget the classification. Terra is officially designated as a Class 12 hostile environment. Extreme gravitational variance, unstable weather patterns, aggressive native fauna, and atmospheric composition that would kill any sensible species within minutes." "Which explains so much about their psychology," Nexil murmured. "Brutish, primitive, direct, no subtlety, no appreciation for proper hierarchy. I heard she actually interrupted Admiral Thex during yesterday's tactical presentation to ask practical questions about logistics. The very thought made Corvin's throat sacs deflate with horror. Interrupted Admiral Thex, the hero of the Betelgeuse campaign, the architect of the Neutral Zone Accords, asked him, and I quote from my recording, whether his supply chain calculations accounted for real-world variables like equipment failure and hostile interdiction. Zephys shook his head slowly, as if a military leader of Admiral Thex's caliber had not considered such elementary factors. The arrogance, Nexel breathed, to question her betters with such casual disrespect. It gets worse, Zephys continued, clearly relishing the opportunity to share gossip. When Admiral Thex politely explained that experienced commanders naturally account for such variables, she asked to see the specific contingency protocols, in front of the entire assembly. The three officers fell silent, absorbing the full magnitude of this social catastrophe. To challenge a superior's expertise publicly was not merely rude, it was a fundamental violation of everything that made civilized society function. And the most disturbing part, Corvin added quietly, is that Admiral Thex actually provided the protocols, treated her questions as if they were legitimate tactical inquiries rather than obvious attempts to undermine his authority. Professional courtesy, Nexel suggested hopefully. Surely he was simply demonstrating proper diplomatic restraint. Perhaps, Zephys agreed, though his tone suggested he believed no such thing. Still, it sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow primitives to disrupt established protocols, where does it end? Today she questions supply logistics. Tomorrow she might challenge battle formations that have maintained galactic peace for centuries. The human cadet finished her meal, wiped her hands on what appeared to be a disposable cloth, and returned to reading her technical manual, completely oblivious to the social dynamics surrounding her, completely unaware that her very presence was an affront to everything these three officers held sacred. Something will have to be done, Zephys said finally. Naturally, Corvin agreed. For the good of galactic civilization, Nexel added. They did not yet understand that Maya Chen had been listening to every word. The diplomatic break arrived with the subtle chime of station bells, and delegates began filtering toward the refreshment alcoves with the practiced efficiency of career politicians. Maya Chen stood, stretched with a series of small pops that made nearby Altarians wince, and headed toward what appeared to be the least crowded corner of the hall. She did not make it there. Cadet Chen, Commander Zephys called out, his voice carrying the particular authority that came from 2 centuries of having people snap to attention when he spoke. A moment of your time, if you please. Maya turned, and Zephys felt a brief moment of satisfaction. The proper response would be a salute, an acknowledgement of superior rank, perhaps even a nervous stammer about being honored by the attention. Instead, she simply looked at him with what could only be described as mild curiosity. Sure, she said, what can I do for you, Commander? Not how may I serve you, sir, or I am at your disposal, Commander. Just, sure. As if she was speaking to an equal. Zephys felt his skin flush a deeper shade of blue. Sub-Admiral Corvin approached from the left, Captain Nexel from the right, a classic flanking maneuver, executed with the precision that had made them legends in their respective fleets. The human stood in the center of their triangle, apparently unaware that she had been tactically surrounded. We have been observing your participation in the summit proceedings, Corvin began, his throat sacs pulsing with controlled authority, and we felt it might be beneficial to offer some guidance regarding proper protocol. Protocol, Maya repeated, and something in her tone made Nexel's ceremonial plumes quiver slightly. Right, what exactly am I doing wrong? The question hung in the air like a live plasma charge. Zephys exchanged glances with his companions. Surely she understood the impropriety of her behavior. Surely this was merely a test of their resolve. Your conduct yesterday during Admiral Thex's presentation, Nexel said carefully, was inappropriate. Questioning a superior officer's methodology in open forum demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding regarding military hierarchy. I see, Maya nodded thoughtfully. So when Admiral Thex presented a logistics framework that would collapse under actual combat conditions, I should have just smiled and clapped. Corvin's scales rippled with barely contained indignation. Admiral Thex is one of the most decorated officers in galactic history. His tactical brilliance is beyond question. His tactical brilliance, Maya said, and now her voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut through battle armor, assumed a supply line vulnerability of 0.03%. I have seen Earth supply convoys achieve higher reliability rates during active bombardment. Either your admiral has never actually commanded logistics under fire, or he was presenting theoretical models for an academic audience. The three officers stared at her in stunned silence. No one spoke to decorated military leaders this way. No one questioned the expertise of their betters with such casual dismissal. Furthermore, Maya continued, apparently warming to the topic, his force deployment calculations assumed enemy compliance with established engagement doctrines, which, in my admittedly primitive understanding of warfare, seems like a really stupid thing to bet your soldiers' lives on. "How dare you?" Zephys whispered, his voice barely audible through the rushing sound of blood in his auditory organs. "How dare I?" "What?" Maya asked. "Point out that your admiral's brilliant strategy has more holes than a cargo net? Or suggest that maybe, just maybe, someone who learned warfare on a planet where everything wants to kill you might have insights worth considering?" Nexel stepped closer, his purple face darkening to something approaching burgundy. "You forget yourself, cadet. You are addressing your betters, officers whose families have served with distinction while your species was still discovering fire." "My betters," Maya repeated, and something in her posture shifted, not dramatically, nothing that would register on casual observation, but suddenly she seemed larger, more present. "Tell me, Captain, exactly what makes you better than me." "Breeding," Nexel snapped. "Education, centuries of military tradition, genetic optimization spanning dozens of generations." "Genetic optimization?" Maya's smile was not pleasant. "Right, so you are saying that you are naturally superior to me because your ancestors selectively bred for specific traits?" "Precisely. And what traits would those be? Intelligence? Physical capability? Combat effectiveness?" Corvin sensed dangerous ground ahead, but Nexil was too deep in righteous indignation to recognize the trap. "All of the above, naturally. We represent the pinnacle of our respective species' development." "Interesting." Maya looked at each of them in turn. "So if I understand correctly, you three represent peak genetic optimization, superior breeding, centuries of military tradition, and the absolute pinnacle of tactical education." "Correct," Zephys said, grateful to have the conversation back on solid ground. "And I," Maya continued, "am a primitive from a death world, with inferior genetics, no noble breeding, and approximately 30 years of military tradition to draw upon." "Yes," all three said simultaneously. "Cool." Maya's grin was absolutely feral. "So when you three tactical geniuses decided to corner the dangerous primitive in an isolated alcove, away from witnesses and security coverage, what exactly was your plan?" The question hit them like a cold nova. Suddenly the careful positioning that had seemed so tactically sound felt very different. Suddenly the isolation they had sought for this conversation felt less like an advantage and more like a trap. "We merely wished to have a private conversation," Corvin said, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. "A private conversation where three senior officers collaborate to intimidate a junior cadet into silence," Maya said pleasantly. "Because that is what this is, right? You want me to stop asking inconvenient questions, stop pointing out flaws in your perfect systems, and just blend quietly into the background like a good little primitive." "You will show proper respect," Zephys growled, his diplomatic mask finally slipping entirely. "Or what?" Maya asked. "You will file a complaint? Have me removed from the summit? Report me to my superiors for the terrible crime of doing my job?" The three officers looked at each other uncertainly. Put that way, their position sounded less intimidating and more. "Your job," Nexel said coldly, "is to observe and learn, not to disrupt established procedures with primitive questions." "My job," Maya corrected, "is to assess galactic military doctrine for integration with Earth Defense Force protocols, which means asking questions when I see problems. And gentlemen, I see a lot of problems." "That is enough," Zephys snarled, and his hand shot out to grab her shoulder. "You will learn proper respect, or you will learn it the difficult way." His fingers never made contact. What happened next would be analyzed by military tacticians for decades to come, but from the alien's perspective, it looked very much like magic. One moment Zephys was reaching for Maya's shoulder, the next he was on his knees screaming while his arm bent in directions that arms were definitely not supposed to bend. Maya stood exactly where she had been standing, her expression unchanged, looking down at the writhing Altarian commander with mild interest. Gentlemen, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, I believe we have reached what my people call a teachable moment. Then she looked up at Corvin and Nexil, both of whom were staring in horrified fascination at their colleague's definitely broken arm. Then she looked up at Corvin and Nexil, both of whom were staring in horrified fascination at their colleague's definitely broken arm. So, Maya said pleasantly, who is next? The sound would haunt Sub-Admiral Corvin's dreams for months afterward. Not the initial crack, though that was disturbing enough, a wet snapping noise like a branch breaking under too much weight. No, it was the symphony that followed, Zephyr's initial shriek of disbelief, the wheeze as his respiratory system tried to process what had just happened, and then the rising wail of genuine agony as his nervous system finally caught up with reality. But perhaps most terrifying of all was the absence of sound from Maya Chen. She stood perfectly still, perfectly balanced, looking down at the writhing Altarian commander with the same mild interest one might show a particularly fascinating insect. No heavy breathing, no combat stance, no indication whatsoever that she had just committed what was technically an act of violence against a superior officer from a foreign military. You broke his arm, Captain Nexil whispered, his voice barely audible over Zephyr's continued screaming. Yes, Maya agreed, as if this were a completely reasonable observation about the weather. I did. Corvin found himself unable to look away from the grotesque angle of Zephyr's forearm. Altarian bone structure was significantly more robust than most species, evolved from a high-gravity world with atmospheric pressure that would crush most civilized beings. The idea that a human, a member of a species that had not even achieved interstellar flight until practically yesterday, could snap an Altarian's arm like kindling was impossible. How? He managed to ask. Physics, Maya replied helpfully. Leverage, applied force, and the structural limitations of biological joints. Your friend here grabbed for my shoulder without considering the potential consequences. I considered them for him. The casual tone of her explanation was somehow more disturbing than if she had been screaming battle cries or displaying obvious aggression. This was not the behavior of someone in the grip of combat instincts or primitive rage. This was calculated, precise, and utterly controlled. This is assault, Nexir said, though his voice lacked conviction. This is a diplomatic incident. You have attacked a senior officer without provocation. Maya tilted her head slightly, like a predator evaluating prey. Without provocation? Captain, your colleague just attempted to physically restrain me during what was clearly an intimidation attempt. In Earth legal terminology, that constitutes assault. I responded with the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. Minimum force? Corvin's throat sacs had gone completely flat with shock. You broke his arm. I could have broken his neck, Maya said matter-of-factly. I could have collapsed his trachea, shattered his kneecap, or introduced him to approximately 47 other ways human beings have developed to efficiently disable opponents. I chose the option that would cause the least permanent damage while ensuring he could not continue his assault. The mathematical precision of her explanation was somehow more horrifying than any amount of barbaric roaring would have been. This was not the response of a primitive warrior drunk on violence. This was a tactical assessment delivered by someone who had clearly considered all available options and selected the most appropriate one. Zephyr had progressed from screaming to a sort of rhythmic whimpering, his uninjured hand clutching at his broken arm while his pale blue skin had taken on a distinctly greenish tinge. Altarian physiology was not designed to process this level of pain, and his system was beginning to shut down non-essential functions in response. He needs medical attention, Corvin said, finally remembering his basic officer training. Yes, Maya agreed. He does. I recommend calling security and having them summon a medic. Also, you might want to mention that he will need xenobiology specialists familiar with human combat techniques. Standard Altarian field medicine probably will not have protocols for this type of injury. The casual way she discussed Zephyr's medical needs while he writhed at her feet was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire situation. No guilt, no concern, no apparent recognition that she had just committed an act that would normally result in court-martial and imprisonment. Just practical advice about proper medical care. You are insane, Nexil breathed. You are completely insane. Do you have any idea what you have just done? Do you understand the consequences? I defended myself against an unprovoked assault by a foreign military officer, Maya said calmly. The consequences will depend largely on how accurately you report the events to station security. Our word against yours, Corvin said, though even as he spoke he realized how hollow the threat sounded. Actually, no. Maya reached into one of her utility pouches and produced a small device that Corvin recognized with growing horror as a personal recording unit. Standard Earth Defense Force protocol requires all personnel to maintain continuous audio and video logs during diplomatic missions, something about ensuring accurate reporting and protecting against false accusations. The small device beeped softly, indicating active recording, which meant, "You have been recording this entire conversation," Nexil said slowly. "I have been recording everything since I arrived at the summit," Maya confirmed, "including your earlier discussion about my primitive nature, your plan to teach me proper respect, and Commander Zephyr's attempt to physically restrain me. Would you like to review the footage before I submit it to station security?" The three aliens exchanged looks of growing panic. Their carefully planned intimidation had become a documented assault by a senior officer against a junior cadet. Their words, their intentions, their actions, all preserved in perfect digital clarity. Around the refreshment area, other delegates were beginning to notice the commotion. The Regalian trade attaché was pointing in their direction while speaking rapidly to his aide. A group of Andromedean tactical officers had stopped their conversation entirely and were staring at the small cluster surrounding the screaming Altarian. Within moments, the carefully contained incident would become a very public spectacle. "This cannot be happening," Corvin whispered. "Oh, but it is," Maya said cheerfully. "In fact, it is about to get significantly worse for all of you. Station security protocols require immediate response to any physical altercation involving diplomatic personnel. They should be arriving in approximately," she glanced at what appeared to be a chronometer on her wrist, 30 seconds. As if summoned by her words, the distinctive whine of security gravlifts could be heard approaching through the station corridors. "I would recommend preparing your official statements," Maya continued helpfully. "Station Commander Thex will want a complete account of events, and I suspect he will be particularly interested in understanding how 3 senior officers came to corner a single cadet in an isolated location." Nexil opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? That they had planned to intimidate her into silence? That they had assumed their rank and breeding would cow a primitive into submission? That they had never considered the possibility that their target might be both willing and able to defend herself? The security team burst into the alcove with weapons drawn and expressions of professional alertness, immediately assessing the situation with trained efficiency. Their leader, a grizzled Centauri sergeant with combat decorations spanning 3 conflicts, took one look at the screaming Altarian, the 2 shell-shocked officers, and the calmly standing human, and his expression shifted to something approaching resignation. "Medical emergency," he barked into his communicator. "Altari medical team to refreshment alcove 7, priority urgent, and get me Commander Thex now." Maya raised her hand politely. "Sergeant, if I may? I have complete recordings of the incident available for your review." The sergeant looked at her with something that might have been gratitude or possibly admiration. "Thank you, Cadet. That will be extremely helpful." As medical teams swarmed around the still whimpering Zephyrs, and security officers began separating the participants for individual statements, Maya Chen stood calmly in the center of the controlled chaos, looking for all the world like someone who had simply handled a minor administrative issue. Sub-Admiral Corvin found himself wondering, with growing dread, what other surprises the human species might have in store for the galaxy. Station Commander Thex arrived with the efficiency of a man who had spent 30 years managing diplomatic crises, and the expression of someone who would rather be commanding a battle fleet in open space than dealing with whatever fresh disaster had just erupted in his supposedly peaceful summit. His pale yellow skin bore the ritual scars of the Betelgeuse campaign, and his 4 eyes moved independently as he surveyed the scene with practiced assessment. Medical technicians swarmed around Commander Zephys, whose whimpering had subsided to an occasional whine as combat stims kicked in. The portable medical scanner beeped ominously as it catalogued the damage. Radius and ulna both fractured in multiple places, ligament damage, probable nerve involvement, and what the Altarian medic described in horrified tones as precision targeting of structural weak points. "Explain," Commander Thex said simply, his voice carrying the particular authority that came from having personally negotiated 17 ceasefires and 3 full peace treaties. Maya Chen stepped forward with a crisp salute that would have made her drill instructors weep with pride. "Sir, Cadet Maya Chen, United Earth Defense Force, reporting incident of attempted assault by foreign military personnel during official diplomatic function. The precision of her protocol was flawless. Not a single word out of place, perfect adherence to interspecies military courtesy, and absolutely no acknowledgement that she had just committed what appeared to be an act of violence against a superior officer. Attempted assault, Commander Thex repeated, his secondary eyes focusing on the still groaning Zephys, while his primary eyes remained fixed on Maya. Yes, sir. Commander Zephys of the Altarian Defense Corps attempted to physically restrain me without legal authority during what I assessed to be a coordinated intimidation effort. I responded with minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat and prevent escalation. Minimum necessary force, Thax mused, glancing at the medical team's increasingly grim expressions as they prepared Zephys for emergency transport. Sir, I have complete audio and video documentation of the entire incident available for official review, Maya continued, producing her recording device with the same casual efficiency she might use to present daily reports. Sub-Admiral Corvin felt his stomach drop through several gravitational layers. In all his years of military service, covering 3 separate conflicts and dozens of diplomatic missions, he had never seen anyone handle official investigation with such calm professionalism while standing over a broken opponent. The recording will show, Maya continued in the same level tone, that Commander Zephys, Sub-Admiral Corvin, and Captain Nexil approached me during the scheduled break, positioned themselves in a tactical formation designed to prevent my departure, and proceeded to deliver what I can only characterize as threats regarding my continued participation in summit proceedings. Captain Nexil opened his mouth to protest, then closed it as he realized that denying the tactical formation would require admitting they had planned something even more damaging. Furthermore, Maya added helpfully, the recording includes their earlier conversation, conducted at Table 12 approximately 47 minutes ago, in which they discussed their intention to, quote, teach the primitive proper respect, and handle me the difficult way if necessary. Commander Thex's expression shifted from professional assessment to something approaching fascination. They discussed this plan publicly. They assumed I could not overhear them, sir. Earth humans have significantly more acute hearing than most species realize, particularly in the low-frequency ranges favored by Altarian, Centauri, and vegan vocal patterns. Corvin felt his throat sacs deflate completely. Not only had the human recorded their intimidation attempt, she had been listening to their planning session. Everything they had said, every dismissive comment about primitive species, every casual assumption about their natural superiority, all of it preserved in digital clarity. I see, Commander Thex said slowly. And when Commander Zephys attempted to physically restrain you? Standard Earth Defense Force protocol for dealing with foreign nationals who attempt unauthorized physical contact during diplomatic missions, sir. Neutralize the immediate threat, minimize collateral damage, preserve evidence and report through proper channels. The clinical precision of her explanation was devastating. This was not a cadet who had panicked and lashed out in primitive fury. This was a trained military professional following established protocols for exactly this type of situation. They have protocols for this? Thax asked, and for the first time his voice carried a note of genuine curiosity rather than official investigation. Earth military doctrine assumes that any species capable of interstellar travel is potentially capable of physical violence, sir. We train accordingly. Around the alcove, word of the incident was spreading through the summit attendees with the speed of a plasma leak. The Andromedean tactical officers were speaking in rapid, excited bursts to their commanding officer. The Regelian trade delegation had produced what appeared to be recording devices of their own, apparently documenting the aftermath for later analysis. Even the normally reserved Arcturian diplomats were pointing and whispering among themselves. Captain Nexil watched his career dissolve in real time as the implications became clear. 3 senior officers had conspired to intimidate a junior cadet from a primitive species, been outmaneuvered tactically and verbally, and now faced official investigation for conduct unbecoming and attempted assault. Worse, they had provided their victim with perfect documentation of their own malfeasance. The medical report indicates significant damage to Commander Zephys's arm structure. Commander Thex noted, consulting his datapad as updated information arrived from the medical team. Yes, sir. Radius and ulnar fractures, probable ligament damage, temporary nerve disruption. He should recover full functionality within 6 to 8 standard months with proper medical care. You assessed this level of damage intentionally. Sir, I selected the response most likely to prevent continued assault while minimizing permanent injury to the assailant. Commander Zephys is approximately 40% larger than me and possesses superior reach and upper body strength. Allowing him to establish physical control would have placed me at significant tactical disadvantage. The matter-of-fact way Maya discussed dismantling a superior officer was apparently too much for several nearby delegates. The vegan cultural attaché had gone pale green and was fanning himself with what appeared to be an ornamental scroll. Two junior Centauri officers were staring at Maya with expressions normally reserved for natural disasters or incoming missile strikes. Sub-Admiral Corvin, Captain Nexil, Commander Thex said, turning his attention to the two remaining conspirators, "Do you wish to contest Cadet Chen's account of events before I review the recorded evidence?" Corvin looked at Nexil, who looked back at him with the expression of a man watching his pension evaporate. What could they possibly say? That they had tried to intimidate her but meant no harm? That they assumed their natural superiority would cow her into submission? That they had never imagined a primitive Deathworlder might actually be dangerous? "No, sir," Corvin said quietly, "we do not contest her account." "Very well." Commander Thex tucked his datapad away with the air of someone who had dealt with far too many diplomatic incidents caused by military personnel who should have known better. "Cadet Chen, you will remain available for follow-up investigation as required. Sub-Admiral Corvin, Captain Nexil, you are confined to quarters pending formal review of this incident by your respective commands." As security personnel began escorting the three disgraced officers toward their temporary detention, Maya Chen stood at perfect attention, looking for all the world like someone who had simply filed a routine maintenance report. The whispers spreading through the summit hall carried a new understanding. The humans might be primitive, they might be new to galactic civilization, but they were definitely not harmless. And Maya Chen, standing calmly in the wreckage of three distinguished military careers, allowed herself the smallest of satisfied smiles. The final medical report arrived 3 hours later, transmitted directly to Commander Thex's office, with the kind of clinical precision that military medical officers used when documenting career-ending injuries. Dr. Yulin, the station's chief xenobiologist, had never seen fracture patterns quite like the ones decorating Commander Zephys's forearm. "Surgical precision," she reported to the hastily assembled review board, her voice carrying the particular fascination of a scientist encountering something entirely new. The breaks occurred at exactly the points of maximum structural weakness in Altarian bone density. Not random impact damage, not the result of excessive force, but targeted application of pressure at specific anatomical locations. Admiral Nexus of the Andromedician Fleet, serving as senior reviewing officer, studied the holographic display of Zephys's injuries with growing unease. "Doctor, are you suggesting this was planned?" "I am suggesting that Cadet Chen possesses detailed knowledge of Altarian physiology, that she applied with surgical accuracy under combat stress. The probability of achieving this injury pattern accidentally is approximately 1 in 47,000. The implications hung in the conference room air like a toxic gas leak. Maya Chen had not simply defended herself against an assault, she had demonstrated tactical knowledge that suggested Earth military training included detailed anatomical studies of potential alien opponents. "Recovery prognosis?" Admiral Nexus asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer would be unpleasant. 6 months minimum, possibly 8. Full surgical reconstruction of both radius and ulna, extensive ligament repair, nerve grafting to restore sensation to his primary manipulator digits. Commander Zephys will require complete retraining on weapon systems and manual controls, which meant in practical terms that his military career was effectively over. Altarian combat doctrine relied heavily on precision manipulation of complex control interfaces. A commander who could not reliably operate his own equipment was no commander at all. The political fallout began almost immediately. Sub-Admiral Corvin received his official notice of disciplinary action while still in station detention, transmitted through proper diplomatic channels with the kind of cold formality reserved for career-ending communications. The Centauri High Command expressed their profound disappointment in his conduct and deep concern regarding his judgment in handling interspecies relations. Translation: he would be lucky to finish his career commanding a supply depot in the Outer Rim. Captain Nexil's fate was perhaps worse. The vegan diplomatic corps had built their reputation on sophisticated cultural sensitivity and refined social intelligence. Having one of their officers documented as participating in what amounted to ganging up on a foreign cadet was the kind of scandal that ended not just individual careers, but generational family advancement. His ceremonial rank insignia were formally removed by special courier, and his name struck from the social register of distinguished military families. Effective immediately, the official communiqué read, Captain Nexel is reduced in rank to Lieutenant Junior grade and assigned to monitoring duties at Deep Space Station 7. Deep Space Station 7 was a maintenance facility for automated sensor platforms, located approximately 4 months' travel from the nearest habitable system. It was where the vegan military sent officers they wanted to forget existed. Meanwhile, Maya Chen sat in Commander Thex's office, apparently reviewing technical specifications for next-generation plasma cannon designs, while the station's senior staff debated her future in hushed, urgent conferences. The Earth Defense Force should be informed, Admiral Nexus said finally, that their cadet has demonstrated exceptional diplomatic capability under pressure. Diplomatic capability, Commander Thex repeated slowly. Is that what we are calling it? She followed proper protocols, documented everything correctly, and handled the aftermath with textbook precision. Most importantly, she neutralized a potentially serious incident without creating an interspecies diplomatic crisis. She broke a senior officer's arm in 17 places. A senior officer who was documented attempting to assault her after participating in a coordinated intimidation effort, Admiral Nexus corrected firmly. If anything, Cadet Chen showed remarkable restraint. The recommendation for commendation was filed within the hour, transmitted directly to Earth Defense Force Command with Admiral Nexus's personal seal. Maya Chen, the primitive Deathworlder who had supposedly needed guidance in proper galactic diplomacy, was officially recommended for accelerated promotion based on her outstanding demonstration of tactical awareness, diplomatic protocol adherence, and crisis management under pressure. Word of the incident spread through the summit attendees like wildfire through a hydrogen leak. Conversations that had previously dismissed human military capability took on distinctly different tones. The Regalian defense attaché quietly updated his species threat assessment of Earth forces from minimal concern to requires further evaluation. The Altarian delegation began discreet inquiries about human military training protocols, particularly focusing on hand-to-hand combat techniques. Most telling was the change in how other delegates interacted with Maya during the remaining summit sessions, where before she had sat alone, ignored, or actively avoided, she now found herself surrounded by curious officers asking carefully respectful questions about Earth tactical doctrine. The Andromedian Strategic Planning Committee formally requested her input on asymmetric warfare scenarios. Even the prestigious Centauri War College extended an invitation for her to guest lecture on unconventional defensive methodologies. Maya handled the attention with the same calm professionalism she had demonstrated throughout the crisis, answering questions with helpful precision while maintaining perfect diplomatic courtesy. She never mentioned the 3 officers who had learned the hard way about underestimating Deathworlders. She did not need to. Their absence from the remaining sessions spoke loudly enough. On the final day of the summit, as delegates prepared to return to their home systems, Admiral Nexus approached Maya at the departure lounge. The Andromedian commander had spent considerable time reviewing Earth's application for full military alliance status, and the documentation he carried suggested the application would receive very different consideration than originally planned. Cadet Chen, he said formally, it has been educational to observe your participation in our proceedings. Thank you, sir, Maya replied with perfect protocol compliance. I have learned a great deal about galactic military cooperation. I suspect, Admiral Nexus said carefully, that we have learned considerably more from you than you have from us. Maya's smile was polite, professional, and somehow managed to contain volumes of unspoken commentary about galactic military doctrine, diplomatic hierarchy, and the general competence of supposedly superior civilizations. Well, sir, she said pleasantly, I suppose that is what these cultural exchange programs are designed to accomplish. As her transport prepared for departure, Maya Chen looked back at Station Nexus Prime one final time, then settled into her seat and opened her technical manual. She had a report to write for Earth Command, recommendations to make about galactic alliance structures, and tactical assessments to complete regarding the various species she had encountered. The galaxy, she reflected, was going to be very interesting once Earth finished integrating all these lessons about diplomacy, military protocol, and the apparent fragility of supposedly superior alien bone structures. After all, there were so many more summits to attend.